and his father kept the matter in his mind. So we see here that he mentions another dream. It probably sounds like it's similar to the other dream, but of course we're using different emblems and details, and potentially when we look through this, it's actually more comprehensive. Again, Joseph doesn't interrupt, but rather his father Jacob rebukes him and questions Joseph what the dream might mean. And it's also interesting because we see Jacob think automatically that his mother and the brothers will bow down to him. But bear in mind, Rachel, his mother, is already dead. So how would she bow down to Joseph? So that's an interesting thought, isn't it? So Rashi makes the comment on this, and he makes a comment of, is not your mother long since dead. He did not, however, understand that his statement really alluded to Bilhah, who had brought him up as though she were his own mother. Jacob's intention in pointing out the absurdity of Joseph's mother, who was dead, bowing down to him, was to make his son forget the whole matter, so that they should not envy him. And on his account, he said to them, shall we indeed come, etc. Meaning, just as it is, as in the fulfillment of the dream, is impossible in the case of your mother, so the remainder of the dream is absurd. But let's look at this. So we kind of gather that the sun, moon, and the stars, 11 stars, were Rachel, Joseph's 11 brothers, based on what Joseph said. However, we may need to see this second dream. It may not be as literal as we think, as in the literal fulfillment of it in the life of Joseph, given Rachel has died and therefore could not bow down to him. But instead, the second dream potentially relates to Messiah, like the star of Joseph rising in power over his family. Messiah will rise as a single star. And it says in Numbers 24:17, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, a scepter shall rise out of Israel. The parallel, you may ask, well, Joseph's single star being surrounded by the adoration of all other heavenly bodies parallels with the royal Messiah, son of David, the future, all of Israel, over all of Israel, dead and living, will bow before him. And as it says in Philippians 2:9-11, being found, does someone actually want to look that up for me? Philippians 2:9-11. Jan, do you mind reading that for me, please? Oh, I can't hear you, sorry. Sorry, still can't hear.
Actually, Dan's not with us.
No, Jan.
Oh.
Jan. Do you want me to ask someone else?
I've got it if you like.
Okay, Coral. Thanks,
Yeah.
Coral.
Therefore, God also has highly exalted him and given him a name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, and those in heaven and those on earth and of all those underneath the earth.
Lovely.
And that is that all you want?
No, keep going. You're right. I just
and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father.
Great. All right. So it just shows you that obviously, like it said, all of Israel, death and living, will bow down to him. So let's jump into verse 11. And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Notice his father, as it says, kept the matter in mind. And Rashi says on this, observe the matter. He awaited and looked forward to the time when this would come to pass. In the same sense, we have in Isaiah 26:2 that watch for faithfulness. And in Isaiah 26:2, it says, open the gates that the righteous nation which keeps the truth may enter in. It was like, although his father rebuked him, but it says he kept the matter in his mind. It was like Jacob knew it was a prophetic word. In other words, he believed in Joseph's dreams. And we see in Genesis Rabbah 84:11, as we know as the Midrash, it says, Jacob thought that the resurrection of the dead would take place in his days. And that is why he said in Genesis 37:10, shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground? Your mother is dead, yet you say that I and your mother will come. So when Jacob heard Joseph's dream, he literally waited and believed the matter to come true. And he waited for Messiah. So it isn't interesting, though, that what was to follow was that Joseph seemed to be in the complete opposite position, didn't he? Like he got thrown in a pit and then taken to Egypt. It seemed everything that was contradictory potentially to what this dream was about. And I think, I don't know about you guys, but do you feel like sometimes you get a word from the Lord and it's like everything that happens after that, like this prophetic word, is like completely opposite to what is happening in your life? And you're just like, what's happening here? Has anyone got an example of that they can share? Do you guys know what I mean when I say that?
Yeah, we know.
Yeah. You know, like I remember when I moved up from Sydney, I had an amazing career and everything down there. And I knew the Lord was saying to start a business, and it was not easy. I couldn't even find a job so I could start this part-time business. And I'm like, what is this, Lord? You know, and he takes you on a journey, sharpening you or tidying you up, so to speak, and getting you into preparation for what he has for you. And we know that his promises are true. We know that the prophetic word that comes from the Father himself is true. We just have to sit with it. Anyway, so I'll get someone just to read the next section, Genesis 37:12-17. Who would like to read this? Jazz, do you mind reading this?
No, it's fine, Cal. So Genesis 37.
Yes, you might just need to come a little bit closer. Sorry, I can't hear you quite.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can now. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, what verse was it?
Yeah, Genesis 37:12-17.
Joseph's betrayal. Then his brothers went to graze their father's flocks at Shechem. Israel said to Joseph, aren't your brothers grazing the flocks in Shechem? Come, let me send you to them. Here I am, he said to them. Then he said to him, go now and check on the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flocks and bring word back to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. A man found him there wandering in the field, and the man asked him, what are you looking for? I'm looking for my brothers, he said. Please tell me where they are grazing. The man said, they moved on from here, for I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, so let's look at this. So you might remember in Genesis 13:18 that Jacob brought the land of Shechem. That's why the sons were going up there to tend to the sheep. I'm not going to go into this, but I'm sure you will remember because we've got so much to cover. But every time we talk about Shechem, Greg always asks us, what is significant about Shechem? So I'm not going to ask that today. But of course, you guys will have had that in your notes several times. Of course, you know, Jacob's well and the covenant with Abraham and all these things. So I'm not going to go through that. But we are there again. They're on their way to Shechem. And so where am I? And the whole list of and remember, actually, the other thing that happened with Shechem in the last portion was Dinah's incident that happened at Shechem. So there is a lot of things, isn't there, that has occurred there. So I just want to focus on the part where Jacob actually asks his son to go up there, and he says, "Here am I." You'll notice that it says in the word in the Bible, sorry, that it says, "Here am I." And in my study, it's interesting that, and it was pointed out that, how can I say it? When key people in the Bible respond this way, it seems it's linked to a prophetic calling or a command. So, for example, if we look at Abraham, he responded this way as well in Genesis 22:1. And then again in Genesis 22:11, when he sacrificed his son, was going to sacrifice his son, he didn't do it, was going to sacrifice his son, and when the Lord told him not to. And we also see it again with Jacob in Genesis 31:11, with regards to the spotted lambs, and when he tells him to go to Egypt. With Moses and the burning bush in Exodus, sorry, I left out of passage there, and in with the spotted lambs, and in Genesis 46:2, when he tells him, Jacob, to go to Egypt. With Moses and the burning bush in Exodus 3:4. Sorry? Someone say something? No? Okay. With Samuel, when he was caught in the middle of the night, in 1 Samuel 3:4. With Isaiah, when the Lord asked, "Who shall I send?" in Isaiah 6:8. So you can see these were callings either directly by God or from angels of the Lord. So what is the parallel here with Messiah, with Joseph going to his brothers? Well, of course, Joseph was called by his father to do that. And of course, Jesus was called to his brethren, and he went as the one sent by God. So let's quickly look at verse 14. He sent him out to the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. So just a quick side note, Hebron to Shechem is about 78 kilometers. So for us living here on the Gold Coast, that's like walking to Brisbane. So it gives you perspective. It's not a small walk, it's a trek. And you will see then he obviously moves on to Dothan. The best kind of distance that I got for this was all up from Hebron to Dothan is about 140, 150 Ks. And for you, for me, this is something that I actually like to look at, because it gives me a perspective of what these guys are actually, you know, walking, and I mean, they're significant distances. I'm just sharing on my screen. I hope you can see it. There's just a little bit of a map here. It shows you where Hebron is. It shows you where Shechem is, and then Dothan, which is further up. I've highlighted these. These are actually from the next chapter, but again, it just Adullam and Timnah. This is where Judah ends up with Tamar. So just giving you a little perspective. I like a visual. I'm a visual person. I'm sure there's others out there that are the same. So just moving on from that, just jumping back to screen. You could say that, of course, going to Shechem and then on to Dothan completely changed his life. I bet he never thought that this was going to happen when he set, journey to go see his brothers and check on them. So to give you a bit of context of Hebron and Shechem and the parallel of this pointing towards Jesus and Messiah, Hebron clearly has links with Messiah with Messiah, son of David, as David became king over Judah there for 7 years. And in 2 Samuel 2:11, that's where we see it. And that time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. Shechem has strong links with Messiah, son of Joseph, because that's where they buried Joseph's bones on Jacob's land. But more interestingly, Jeroboam, which I touched on at the beginning of today's portion, the son of Nebat, which is the son of Ephraim from the royal line of the house of Joseph, rebelled against the house of David there at Shechem, and it became his capital city. So again, you will see the account of this around 1 Kings 11, 26 to 40. But I probably would read that all the way through to 1 Kings 14, which I did. And it just comes to life with the knowledge of, what we're talking about today, and putting that perspective on it. You could also say this journey Joseph took from Hebron to Shechem pulls together the links between the two Messiahs. So Messiah, son of Joseph, and of course, Messiah, son of David. Verse 15 and 16, there's a man that he meets on the way. And I'm not going to go into detail here, but Greg also has touched on this over a couple of portions where we see angels appearing on behalf of God. And Rashi's interpretation or input on this was saying that for verse 15, this was angel Gabriel. And as it says, and the man was Gabriel. So let's see the link to Gabriel. Sorry, let me just read that out to you. This was the angel Gabriel, as it is said in Daniel 9:21. So in Daniel 9:21, it says, yes, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in a vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, reached me about the time of the evening offering. And further to this, if we read some of the Midrash from Genesis Rabbah 84:14, it says, he, Joseph, was met there by three angels for scripture. Says, a man found him, and the man asked him, and the man said, let us go to Dothan, for such are the designs of the Almighty. So I'm going to leave that little one for you to ponder. I'm still pondering on the three angel concept myself, but just the same, I thought it was worth mentioning. But what we're going to move on to is just looking at the parallels of these couple of verses from Joseph to Messiah. So Joseph is looking for his brothers and the flocks of his father, as we are well aware. And Jesus came and said in Matthew 15:24, I sent only to the lost sheep of the, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. And then again, we see in Luke 9:10, for the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. So in that context, he was referring to his own Jewish community and how they had moved far from the Torah. In verse 17, the man said, they've gone from here up to Dothan. He moves up. So where is Dothan? That is north of Shechem from that map that I showed you. And that's where obviously they were tending sheep. And the interesting thing about Dothan, it is also the place that was the residence of Elisha. Elisha, if we refer to 2 Kings 6:13, it shows the scene of the remarkable visions and chariots that he saw and the horses of fire surrounding the mountain, etc. So I thought that was a little interesting side note there. All right, so 18 to 24. Can I get Glennis, do you mind reading 18 to 24 for us, please?
Yes. I've got to find it. It was 37, 18 to 24. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the desert, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it.
Oh, beautiful. Thanks, Glenys. So I'm just going to move directly from that verse into the parallels of the Messiah, just for the sake of time. And like Joseph, the plans obviously by his brother was to put him to death. And we see that with the same with Jesus. And we see that in Matthew 26, 3-4. I'll just read this out to you. Then the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders of the people assembled at the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and plotted to take Jesus by trickery and kill him. And we also see it written in when Peter says it in Acts 3:14-15. I won't read that out to you. So it was Matthew 26, 3-4 and Acts 3:14-15. In verses 21, we see Reuben steps up and says, what does he say? Reuben heard it and he delivered him out of the hands and said, let us not kill him. So remember, Reuben, we know, is the firstborn via Jacob and Leah. So he's saying not to obviously shed any blood, which would mean death. And why would he say this? Well, Rashi has a little bit to say about it, a very tiny little bit to say. He thought, I'm the firstborn and the chief among them, and blame will attach to no one but myself. But then we know when we go to verse 23, they took him and stripped him of his robe. And I know, as you know, I explained to you earlier the meaning of pasim, which means many colors when we're talking about his tunic. What I didn't mention, because I wanted to keep it to here, but it comes from the root word payis. And this is the root word, the Hebrew word for lottery. So I'm sure this is probably tying back into what Cam was saying before. And it's interesting in Genesis Rabbah, which is Bereshet Rabbah 84:8, it is called varicolored pasim because they cast lots over it. And to who should carry it to their father, the lot fell to Judah. So it's highly likely that they connected the interpretation from Psalms 22:18 and is connected with Messiah, which is connected to Messiah, son of Joseph. And Psalms 22:18 says, they divide my garments among them and my clothing they cast lots. So Cam, that's exactly what you were mentioning earlier. But we also see the parallel with Messiah where it says in John 19:24, they said, therefore, among themselves, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it. Whose shall it be? That the scripture might be fulfilled, which it says back in what we just said before, Psalms 22:18. They divided my garments among them and my clothing they cast lots. Therefore, the soldiers did these things. You also see the parallel to Jesus too in Matthew 27:28, where it says they stripped him. Just quickly, the pit in verse 24, they put Joseph into a pit which was empty with no water in it, can be a parallel to the grave that Jesus laid in after he died as an empty tomb. And that we see in John 19:41. Now, in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden, a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. You could also say that Joseph, because Joseph was cast into the pit, has a parallel to Christ when it was said in Matthew 12:40, the second part of it, so shall the Son of Man be there 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So the emphasis is on the heart of the earth. You see Joseph in a pit in the earth. So it actually has that correlation there. All right, so we're going to smash through this last bit. And to be honest, what I might not... shall we read through this last bit? What's the time? I think I'm going to not read through it, but we're just going to reverse to the verses just so we can quickly move into the second chapter. Okay, so in verse 25, we're going from 25 to 36 in this section. It says they sat down to have a meal. So what is the parallel to Messiah here? Well, Messiah's crucifixion and burial, as we know, took place on Passover Eve, the day of Passover Seder. So that's that correlation there where they're having that meal. And it says in verse 25, then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there were a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, and with their camels bearing spices, balm, myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. Now, Rashi makes a comment on this, and I'm sure you can already see the correlation coming through here anyway. But he makes the comments that why does Scripture especially announce that they were laden with? It is to tell you how great it is the reward of the righteous. It is not unusual. It is not usual for Arabs to carry anything but naphtha and itran, which is tar, which are evil smelling. But this one, Joseph, the righteous, was specially arranged that they should be carrying fragrant spices so that he should not suffer from a bad odor. I think that's actually really lovely. Isn't that nice? You know, and when we look at the spices and myrrh the Ishmaelites carry, we can also say, of course, there's that parallel to Jesus when Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus wrapped the body, brought myrrh and aloes for the body. And we see that in John 19, 39 to 40. We won't read that out. There is so much scripture here, guys. I could just keep throwing it at you, but, you know. And just a side note with that, it says that the spices that they got for Jesus was about 100 pounds. So that's about 45.5 kilos. That's a lot of spices. Okay, so I just want to draw your attention to the fact that Judah is mentioned in verse 26, and he was the one to suggest to kill his brother for money and conceal his death. And it kind of, I mean, for me, it shows, you know, the character of Judah, right? And I guess it probably, you can keep that in mind for when we move into the next chapter. Okay, so verse 28, the Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelite for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. The parallel here with Messiah is they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels, and we see that also with Judas Iscariot making a deal with the chief priests for Jesus, as mentioned in Matthew 26, 14 to 15. In verse 29, we see Reuben. He returned to the pit, and it was empty, and he tore his clothes. And, you know, my first question is, where did Reuben go for him to return to the pit? It's like, where did he go? Anyway, he returned to the pit. Rashi offers an interesting thought on this, and Reuben returned. When Joseph, was sold, he had not been present, for it was the day his turn to go tend to his father. That would be the reason. Well, according to Rashi. Another explanation is he had not sat with them at the meal because he was occupied with his sackcloth and fast in penitence for having disturbed his father's couch. So there you go. So the parallel that we see here with Messiah is just like Reuben, we see him returning to the pit and seeing, excuse me, in empty. And what do you reckon that parallel is with Messiah then?
Empty grave.
Yeah. So when the disciples and Mary and the disciples, as Coral pointed out, Mary was the first person yesterday, wasn't she? That you pointed out yesterday, Coral, in our meeting, to see that the grave was empty. And we can see that in these verses in Luke 24, 1 to 7, John 20, 1 to 2, and Matthew 28, 1, where we read of that. Verse 31, they took his tunic and killed a kid of the goat and dipped the tunic in it. Then they set the tunic of many colors and brought it to their father and said he was dead. Do you know where your son's tunic is? Do you know whether this is your son's tunic or not? That's what he said to Jacob. And I just want to read you an excerpt that I read out of a book from First Fruits of Zion. It actually explains it really lovely. So better than I can explain it to you. So I give that reference to these guys. So Joseph survived, and this is in regards to the garment dipped in blood. Though Joseph survived the pit and went alive into Egypt, his brothers concocted a ruse to convince Israel, their father Jacob, that he was dead. In the Gospels, the wicked Sadducean priests concocted a similar ruse to discredit stories about the resurrection. They bribed the soldiers assigned to the guard the tomb, telling them, "You are to say, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep." And that's in Matthew 28:13. This story was widely spread among the Jews, and it is to this day. And it says that 2 verses later in verse 15, in order to make it appear as if Joseph was dead, his brothers slaughtered a goat and dipped the garment into the goat's blood. The goat's blood alludes to a sin offering. The Torah prescribes the sacrifice of a single goat as a sin offering on behalf of the nation on the Day of Atonement, as we all are aware. The high priest offered a single goat to expiate the sins of Israel. Joseph's bloody garment alludes to Messiah. He is clothed with a robe dipped in blood in Revelations 19:13. All right. Another thing here, just want to quickly note, is that Jacob's sons just have tricked him with Joseph's coat. But does this sound familiar? Do you guys remember another trickery that occurred prior to this?
Yes.
Yep. No?
Yes.
So
the goat skin of the Esau.
yeah, well done, Coral. That's exactly right. So it's interesting what is happening to Jacob is what he did to his own dad in terms of tricking him by wearing, goat skin that, felt like Esau, so to speak. And we see that in Genesis 27:16. Okay, that was the first chapter. So I was hoping to be further along, of course, but at the same time, I don't know about you, but some of the times you just don't want to rush these things because there's so much good stuff in there, isn't there? Would you agree?
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. All right. So just in summary, it seemed like everything was against Joseph, but at the time of the crisis, God seemed very much absent, didn't he? But he wasn't. And I think in hindsight, for his brothers and for Jacob, and also for us, we see that he was very much present the whole way there. And although Joseph, I guess, was afflicted, he actually gave life to Israel in the end when we start to read more into it. And we can see, if we jump forward a few chapters into Genesis 50:20, he says that, Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for I am in the place of God. But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people's lives, Now, therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones." And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. And I mean, just reading that, I don't know about you, but it's like I'm hearing Jesus in that. Would you agree? Like it just has that, therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. It's just so lovely and gentle of speech as well in that case. And, when we ask what the coming Messiah will look like, we have an answer provided in the story of Joseph, don't we? And particularly in Jacob's words, when we see refer to Genesis 49:22-26, and it outlines it all there. But Joseph's story, look, it is a story. It's like it's a story of the whole Bible. It's the story of glory through suffering. It's exaltation through humiliation. It's the story of the cross and the crown. So, and of course, we've got more of Joseph's story to happen yet, and this is just the start. But I really loved going through this first chapter and really studying it, and I hope you guys did too. So what we'll do, does anyone have any questions about that before I try and smash through Judah and Tamar's story in chapter 38? You're all good? Lovely. You know, what's really interesting about Judah and Tamar is that you have Joseph in chapter 37, and then you've got Judah comes up in 38, and then we go back to Joseph in 39. It's like this little, you know, person rearing his head in this chapter, and I think it's there definitely for a reason. It's kind of setting the stage, I believe, like of these two kingdoms that are coming through. And so I don't think it's I think it's purposely put there. So of course we talk about Judah and Tamar. That is, Tamar is his daughter-in-law. Up until now we only have seen Judah mentioned obviously when he was born, and of course his input into his input into the exile or the involvement of Joseph being exiled to Egypt. And remember, he was the one that suggested killing him for money. Like I said, you know, as we go through the story, it's just to remember maybe his personality. I'm not saying we always say that way for life, but it obviously walking into this story, that's what we're backing it off and understanding the type of person who he was. And so do any of you guys remember who he was the son of, and what order, like what number was he? Just to ask.
4, I think it is 4. And Leah.
Yeah. Did I hear a 4 and a Leah?
Yeah.
Oh, well then you guys are perfect. That is exactly what it is. So Leah had Judah, and he was the 4th son. Okay, so we're going to just read through quickly. Cam, actually, have you got your Bible there, Cam? No, you're doing technical support. Okay, so what I might do is, Beth, do you mind reading chapter 38, 1 to 11 really quickly in your fast voice, please?
It came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he married her and went into her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. And she conceived yet again and bore a son, and called his name Shelah, who was at Shezib, which she bore him. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. And Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and marry her, and raise up an heir to your brother." But Onan knew that the heir would not be his. And it came to pass when he went to his brother's wife that he emitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord. Therefore he killed him also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown." And he said, lest he also like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house.
Lovely. Thanks, Beth. I appreciate that. All right. So in this last 15 minutes, I'm going to try and move through this quite swiftly, just so we can try and capture all the detail that we need to understand this chapter. So if we look quickly at verse 1, it talks about him. It came across a time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Elamite whose name was Hira. And in other translations to this, it actually says something quite different, where it says, now it came about that time that Judah was demoted by his brothers, which was really interesting, because if you actually look up the word departed, it actually means in Hebrew, yurad, to come down, go down, descend, bring you down. I mean, isn't that interesting? And I think, if we look at this translation, it probably makes sense of what Rashi was saying here, where he says, and it came to pass at the time to teach that his brothers degraded him from his high position. When they saw his father's grief, they said, you told us to sell him. If you had not told us to send him back to his father, we would have also obeyed you. And so, with him being the one that suggested to kill him, obviously they didn't kill him, but they acted out as if they did. He has now been demoted, descended. So again, it just shows you how important it is just to navigate and read into some of these words, because they actually create more meaning and context to the situation. So food for thought. It also says that the Adullamite woman, which also, excuse me, sorry, I just needed to clear my throat, which could be that he meant her in Adullam, of course, because as we saw on the map before, there is an Adullam there. But it also, of course, later on it says, because later it says goes up to Timnah. But on a side note, Adullam, it's also where David fled. So that is, he went to the caves when he was seeking refuge. And that is in 1 Samuel 22:1 and 1 Chronicles 11:15. And it says in verse 2 that Judah saw a daughter there of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. And again, then the word Canaanite, when you look it up in Hebrew, can change out to merchant. So Canaanites are known as merchants. So if you're seeing that, it just gives you a bit of reference to when you're reading the Bible as well. Canaanite can also mean translated to merchant. So why do you think it does that? Well, like I said, when if you look up into the concordance, it gives that meaning. And I find sometimes, isn't it, some of the meanings of the words you think to today's standard, 2020 standards, is completely different to what it is when we jump into the Strong's Concordance or alike. So like I said, it's always good to dig deeper. So as we know, Judah had 3 sons, and that was Onan, and Shelah. And Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and of course her name was Tamar, which means palm tree. And it says in verse 7, Judah's firstborn was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. Rashi puts an input here as well, where it says he was wicked in the eyes of the Lord, like the wickedness of Onan, which is the second son. But I actually have another thought around that when we get to that, and committing the same sin. This must have been the case because of Onan. It is said in verse 10, and the Lord slew him also. Onan's death was for a similar reason as Er's death. Why did commit this sin? So that she could not bear children, and her beauty thereof become impaired. So he didn't want her beauty, didn't want her to gain the weight or not look beautiful anymore, as it seems, because of having children. Which is interesting in a time where children were really important to have. So anyway, that's Rashi's interpretation there. We look at verses 8 to 10, and it says that Judah said to Onan, go to your brother's wife and marry her and raise up an heir to your brother. And we know that he didn't do this. He admitted his sin on the ground, lest he should give her an heir to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, therefore he killed him. So what is this? Why do we see the second brother doing the exact same thing? And it's interesting. Why is she even going to the second brother? And this is what I was touching on before in the first hour, that it was like as if they were already keeping the instructions that the Lord had given Moses later on Now, because this is considered a Levirate marriage, and what is interesting with this, along of other things, is that, like I said, they're doing it now. They keep it. I find it just amazing. The more that I'm studying the Word, how many things are coming up before Moses's instructions that they're doing now. And so we get a sense of what the Levirate marriage is about in Deuteronomy 25:5-10, and basically what happens is the brothers, you can go away and read that yourself just for time's sake, but basically, and I think we've covered it before last year, was it earlier this year when we were doing Torah portion, but basically if the first brother dies, the second brother takes up the wife to carry on the name of the first brother, and to carry that through. And then if the brother doesn't want to do it, this is when the sandal, he gives the sandal. And Beth, I remember you mentioned it the other week at Hayeside. Yeah, and I was thinking of you about this. So couldn't remember where it was at the time, but I knew there was the sandal. So obviously this was the responsibility of Onan. He didn't do it. He displeased the Lord, and then his life was taken. And Gil's the other person that I read his commentary on. Like I said, he refers to a lot of the rabbis, makes this comment here. He didn't want to impregnate Tamar and for her to bear a son that should be called his brother's and inherit his estate. So he's saying a different intention to say what Rashi was saying earlier, because he was saying was doing the same thing Onan was doing because of the beautiful side of things, not making her lose her youth, so to speak. But in this case, Gills makes a comment that he didn't want to lose his estate. And the thing which, this is continuing on, and the thing which he did displease the Lord, being done out of envy to his brother and through want of affection to the memory of his name, and it may be out of covetousness to get his estate into his own hands, and especially as it frustrated the end of such a usage of marriage, of marrying a brother's wife, which appears to be according to the will of God, since it afterwards became a known law of his, and it was the more displeasing as it was not only a check upon the multiplication of Abraham's seeds as promised, but since the Messiah had to come from Judah, this was doing all to hinder it laid in its power. So there you go. A different thought process there. And in verse 11, moving forward, we see that Tamar was told by Judah to stick around for the youngest son until he got old enough. But Rashi says to his old enough. But Rashi says here, that is to say, he pushed her off with a straw. He put her off with a lame excuse, in other words, because he never intended to give her to him in marriage. And he also makes a comment, she is a woman of whom it may be presumed that men she marries will always die young. So imagine being Tamar and feeling that, that two of her husbands had died, and now she's waiting for the youngest, and she's like, is this going to happen? And he's in his head, Judah possibly thinking, well, every guy she gets, every husband she gets dies, and he probably didn't want to lose another son, to be fair. So what does this show you? I don't know. It's an interesting scenario. All I know is that in the state of Tamar, she was keen, as you know, to probably uphold the Levirate marriage in some way, and she stood there and waited for the youngest son to get older. However, as you know, and I'm not going to get someone to read the next section because we're going to run out of time, very much so, but I will go into the fact that he asked her to stay in the house until he was older. And then you see in verse 14, Wisdom, let me just jump down. I just got to catch my spot. Yes, 12 and 13. We see that he loses his wife. Judah actually loses his wife, and he then goes up to the sheep shearers at Tamar with his friend the Hurrah. And it was told to Tamar, saying, look, your father-in-law is going up to Tamar to shear sheep. So she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself and sat at an open place, which was on the way of Tamar, for she saw that Shelah had grown and was not going to be given to her. So she took it in her own hands to, well, we could probably say took it in her own hands to do this for sure. But we might be thinking, why did she do this? Why was she prostituting herself? I know I have thought this as well. And to be quite honest with you, and again, we've got to take our 2020 goggles off and look at it, in the time of that, in that day and time, and the instructions that they were living within. It says here, now because I'm jumping ahead, I'm just trying to keep up with my own sort of notes here. Just bear with me 1 second. Okay. All right, so let's just jump into what Rashi comments and says here. She sat at the entrance of NEM. It's literally at the opening of eyes, at the place where the eyes became and opened, at the crossroad, which is on the way leading to Tamar. And other studies basically said that Jacob couldn't miss her there, where this was actually positioned. He couldn't miss her where she was sitting. There's a big read on this as well in Satar 10b. If you'd like to, when I say big read, a longer read, where it talks about where he saw her as a prostitute, that her face, he didn't recognize her, because prostitutes in those days would actually uncover their faces, and they're saying that in those times she probably covered her face when she was at home, being the daughter-in-law when she was living there, so he didn't recognize this. But as we know, they did what they did, and she concealed her identity. But in part of being able for that to happen, she actually asked for a couple of things before they did that. So I guess she could, in later, as you know, expose Judah for what he actually done. So when we look at that, the couple of things that she'd asked from him was, yes, he wanted to give her a young goat on hand, but he was happy to make a pledge. So a pledge is a down payment to her by giving her his signet and cord and staff. Given these items probably would be similar to us giving over our ID and credit cards today. I had a bit of a little story with that, but I won't say that now. So what does the signet mean? So the signet was a ring. Signet ring was what they used to make an impression on clay pots. It was basically like an authorization for authorization purposes. And the cord refers to the fringes of the hem of his garment. So remember earlier I explained in the account of Joseph what the hem of the garment means, and that the colors and how the embroidery was done indicated a person's status. So in this time also the staff, the third thing that he handed over her was a form of identification. So remember Moses collected the 12 staffs of the tribal leaders, and their names were written on the staff. So she took this as a down payment, so to speak, and you could say that was his 3 forms of identification for what was to happen down the track. There is some reading that you can look on this in Genesis Rabbah 85:9, where it's talking about the Holy Spirit inspired her to ask for these 3 particular things. So if you are inclined, feel free to read on that later on. And of course, these 3 symbolic things can also be considered as messianic sort of foreshadows as well. We see from verse 20 to 23, that Judah is then looking for the harlot, which is Tamar, to give her the goat and and to get his pledge, his items, his identification back. And of course, it says in verse 23, we may become a laughing stock if we don't get this sorted, essentially. Rashi interprets it as, let her keep the pledged items. If you seek her further, the matter will become public and disgrace will follow. For what more can I do to redeem my promise? For I have sent the kid and I can do no more. He also says, because Judah has deceived his father through a kid goat, for he had dipped Joseph's coat in its blood. Therefore, he too was being deceived through a kid of a goat, which is interesting, isn't it? So, of course, 3 months pass, and it comes past, and then Judah says, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, Judah is told that Tamar, his daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child. Clearly, he didn't know that he was the other participator of this particular situation at this point. And it's interesting because he was quick to judge and to provide a solution, even though he was involved in it. And of course, there was only this was the only time where the ancestry of Messiah fell. This wasn't the only time where the ancestry of Messiah fell under suspicion, because we see it also as a similar tale of King David. David's fathers and brothers thought he had been conceived through infidelity. As it says in Psalms 51:5, behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me. And there is a Jewish legend around it. I have got it here, but again, we're at 12:02, so you may have to look that one up. That basically, there's a legend around it. Give it a look at and see for yourself. So you could also say that Jesus also saw this with Jesus as well, when Joseph assumed Mary, whom he was engaged to, had been unfaithful to him. So it's quite interesting, isn't it, seeing these, these stories. So if we look up just very quickly in verse 24 and 26, he tells her Judah says to bring the person out to be burnt. When she comes out, and he's by the man to whom these belong, I am with child. And she said, please determine who these are. Then he brings out his identification, basically. And obviously the shock of Judah. And but what we see in verse 26, we see Judah saying, she has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he never knew her again. But it is interesting there. They say that he never, in some of the readings that I've had, it says he never knew her, but there's other interpretations saying that he continued to know her. So obviously we see that Judah acknowledges it, and I said because of Shelah, but in summary, Tamar did hide herself behind the veil for 3 months, but holding in her hands was the identifications of Judah, but more importantly, the foreshadow of Messiah. And Messiah came from the line of David and from the line of Judah and Tamar. And you could say we see God has also concealed the identity of Messiah to the Jewish people today. So obviously she has the babies, and then we see that one of them, Perez, is it Perez? I'm trying to think. Yeah, stuck his hand out first, and it was the other way around. Now it came to pass at the time of giving birth, twins, and one who put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand. This one came out first, and then it happened as he drew back that his brother came out unexpectedly and said, how did you break through? So basically, this breach be upon you. I find it amazing that happened, that he stuck his hand out, came back, went up the birth canal, the other one came out. That blows my mind. I've never had a child, but I could feel that. And of course, Perez means breach. And in verse 29, it says, why? How did you break through? This breach be upon you. Therefore, his name was called Perez, which is quite fitting word to the link of the line of Messiah coming through and breaking through. And with that, we're going to leave that there. What I do want to say is, as much as we look at the story of Judah and Tamar as how God is a redemptive God, isn't he?
Yeah.
And I think it just shows our humanness and our dependency on him. And I just love it that it becomes relatable to people who actually do come to know Yeshua, that there are people that have messed up, but he is perfect, he is good, he is kind, he is loving, and he is redemptive. So we are over time by 6 minutes, but I hope you had a great time this morning. I have studying this. There's so much good stuff in here, and there's more that I could have given you in the next couple of chapters. But I just pray that you have a blessed day, and we will catch up next week. I think Greg's on next week for the next tour portion. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Cal.
Bye.